Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your ultimate lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hey, this is Catherine Tabor, Senator Padme Amidala from Star Wars The Clone Wars. And you're listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Stay on the light side.
You found it. This is Podcast Stardust, the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we're diving back into some Star Wars comics with a discussion of Shadows of Starlight in this episode. But first, Jay, where can we be found around the internet?
All right. We are easily found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this will be our full spoiler discussion of the High Republic Shadows of Starlight, which was written by Charles Soule and has been published by Marvel Comics. There's been a bunch of different artists that participated in this project across all 4 issues, but we got covers by Phil Noto, which are just really gorgeous. Mm-hmm. So make sure you check those out. Jay, I guess the best way to describe this miniseries is each one of these issues focuses on a subset of characters or one character and kind of tells their story in the aftermath of the fall of Starlight Beacon at the end of phase 1 and what they were doing in that time up to the beginning of phase 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great way to explain it. And it was impressive in the way that it tied a lot of these stories to other pieces of media that we've gotten in the High Republic, such as, books that we've read and, other types of compilations and things like that, which I really appreciated that. So, but yet you didn't feel like you necessarily had to read some of those other things to really appreciate this. And I think it was an awesome supplement too, because I'm so visual. So getting to see some of the images from the pages of the books that we've read for me was just really, really like helped me to be relatable to the story a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. What's interesting to me is that I found this to be a great companion piece to Tales of Light and Life. Mm-hmm. And that there's actually like the Bell Zettifar issue refers you to Tales of Light and Life.
It does.
And there's some events that happen over the course of 6 weeks that are in Tales of Light and Life. And of course, we talked about that last week. And then it also brings in characters from all over the place. Characters that were in middle grade books, characters that were in the manga. And I was really, really surprised at how far reaching the comic was in a way that we hadn't seen characters show up in Marvel Comics so far. So really, really fantastic set there. And it instantly added a whole bunch of depth to Eye of Darkness for me.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, some of the things that happened in this comic were kind of spoiled by having read Tales of Light and Life and Eye of Darkness, but that's fine. It did fill in some blanks and give some background. And honestly, I don't have the time for it now, but it's made me eager to go back and revisit those stories now that I've got this background.
No, I think that's a great way to put it. And, for me too, I was thinking as I was reading these that there's a lot of fans that maybe don't want to commit to a lot of these longer novels and, and whatnot. And this is a really great, efficient way to consume these stories and still, you still get to know what's going on. And then you also get details, like you said, that just weren't even in the books, and you get it in a very visual way. So like, for example, like General Vice I didn't even realize that that's what she looked like, and
Right.
Shrike, same
Right.
thing. I was like, wow, this is really cool. So I just really appreciated all of that.
So I hadn't actually planned on carving this out into a non-spoiler and a spoiler section, but I feel like we just did a non-spoiler section on there. And as I think you can tell, both of us are going to recommend this quite a bit. So that having been said, if you want to push pause here and go read these comics and come back, this would be a good spot to do it. But let's get into some of these stories. As we said earlier, each one of them kind of tells the story of a different character or a subset of characters. The first issue primarily focuses on the Jedi Order as a whole, but a little bit more specifically towards Yoda and another character who I think would be a surprise to a lot of people who didn't read the Edge of Balance manga, and that's Aslan Rowe.
Mhm.
Uh, so, what did you think about this one?
No, I thought this was a really great, like, first introduction to some of the aftermath of, with Starlight Beacon and getting to see some of these Jedi Masters that play some pretty big roles later on, especially in, the novels that we got. And I was also very surprised in some ways by the direction that this took with Yoda,
Hmm.
in that, we had, like, again, with Aslan Rel and getting to see him come to life, and then also getting to see Jedi Masters like Pratri Veter, for example, and Opal Rancisis, and those
Hmm.
types of masters that, we were also very familiar with in the, I guess you could call it the current age of Star Wars, so to speak. But yeah, I just and it didn't seem forced either. I mean, yeah, there were things that were happening all over the place, but yet it was a very cohesive kind of a story, and it really kept you interested.
Right. So yeah, this picks up right after the Fall of Starlight Beacon. And each one of these comics does this. It'll say like 1 year
Mhm.
ago, and then it'll be like a week later, or 2 months later, or 5 months later, or whatever, as we get closer and closer to the beginning of Phase 3, which is a year later. But Yoda goes off to find someone and to do some research on what's going on with the Nameless. And then as you were saying, the Grand Masters of the Order and some of the other masters assemble all the Jedi in the Republic Senate building, which I thought was pretty cool. And they are announcing the issuance of the Guardian protocols, which had not been used for generations. I love this. This was so cool.
Yeah.
They're up there talking about how they don't do this lightly, and this is what it means. And they have all these things like listed in Arabesh behind them. And so I like translated it only for them to actually tell you what it was in the next couple panels. But the first one is that there's going to be acceleration of youngling combat instruction. So younglings will start taking on fully operational lightsabers as soon as their trainers deem them suitable. The next one is that with all the Jedi having been recalled, the outposts are going to be staffed by droids who will then relay requests to the Jedi Order. Independent research projects are paused. Everyone needs to be focusing on this crisis at hand. They are having early Padawan trials. Jedi of any age, Padawans of any age, can advance to the rank of Jedi Knight if they pass their trial. And we see Amadeo Azazo there. The
Mhm.
first time I read this one, I didn't even know who he was. But then having read that last story in Tales of Light and Life, I was like, oh, it's Amadeo. How cool.
Yeah.
And then the next one gets cut off and they don't actually touch on what it is in following panels. And I'm talking about the when the Arabesh gets cut off. It says resource, and then it's MA, and the rest of the words cut off, but the following word is restrictions. So I'm not
Mhm.
entirely sure what they were getting out there. Did you have any idea on that one?
No, not really,
Okay.
honestly.
And then they are authorizing offensive combat as required, which when you stop and think about it, the Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for
And
attack.
never for attack, yep.
Right. And the final one is no Jedi travels alone. So, yeah, they're taking a different stance on things to deal with this crisis of, the Nile and their Jedi destroying monsters.
Yes, and this really lays the groundwork for a lot of the things that happen over the next 100 years even. I mean, even down to the way that the lightsabers are constructed. But,
Yeah.
I'll put a pin in that for just a second, but it was really, I think, just genius the way that they kind of bounced back and forth between what was being announced, and then you would see some of the younglings going, are we ready for that?
Uh-huh.
Especially with the combat instruction deeming full, are they allowed to do that?
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. It's like, wait, what's going on here? So it's kind of like the same thing that we see during the Clone Wars, where, that's kind of the next evolution to this kind of a thing where, when we saw Ahsoka, for example, just being placed right into the heat of combat, and it was because they needed to elevate these Padawans quicker and quicker and quicker out of necessity and almost desperation. And so this is that first phase of that, I feel like, going forward.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And so I want to get right to that thing you put a pin in, which is the lightsaber construction.
Mhm.
And we get to see Jedi Master basically in a room with a whole bunch of other Jedi, and she's putting like the final touch on the perfect High Republic lightsaber hilt by like scraping off just the tiniest fleck from the hilt to give it the right balance. And then Master Karak and Falah is there. And I about jumped out of my seat because did you read the Darth Vader stories that he was in?
No, no.
Okay. So in Charles Soule's run on Darth Vader, it picks up right after the end of Revenge of the Sith.
Mhm.
And one of the first things Palpatine has Darth Vader do is make his Sith lightsaber. But you just can't be given a lightsaber as Sith. You have to go out there and take it. And that required a Sith to hunt down a Jedi, take his kyber crystal, and bleed it. Well, the
Mhm.
problem is they just killed them all. And so he goes to a remote outpost and finds some old Jedi records and locates Kurak and Falah, who had taken the Barash vow,
Oh, wow.
tracks him down, gets into this long, drawn out brawl of a battle, defeats him, and then takes his crystal back to Mustafar where he bleeds it. We're going to have to cover those comics one day on this show
Oh,
because
wow, yeah.
it's just absolutely fantastic. But there he is, Kirkham Falah. So another Charles Soule creation is there. Anyway, so they're having this conversation about this, and then they start making battle sabers. There's no other way to put it. The Jedi are just kind of making these remarks like they're ugly, and it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, but we're going to go through a whole bunch of them because this is a time of war, and we're going to be losing them. We have to have sabers on standby. I mean,
Exactly.
that was really something.
Yeah, and again, this is kind of laying the groundwork for the way that even the Jedi robes end up being very functional instead of what
Mhm.
we see in the High Republic. Yeah, I was cracking up at that. They were like, "Ooh, those are." He's like, "They don't have to be pretty. They just have to produce a blade that will keep a Jedi safe." And then, but the Blade Master goes on to even mention Professor Hu Yang.
Yep.
So, and I was like, "Oh, there it is." That's where all of this is, evolving from here, and this is the perfect tie-in.
Right. Yeah. So that was something. So I think we kind of get our answer is like why the High Republic stopped using those ornate lightsabers to do something that's, like you said, far more functional going
Yep.
forward there. So we jump to 3 months after the fall of Starlight Beacon, and we see Reese Silas and another Jedi by the name of Addie. I think this is the one that maybe showed up in that VR game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but, they're looking at a memorial for it, which says an Aurebesh for the lost, and we have, like, Jedi that are in blue, which I presumed are missing in action, and other Jedi that are in red, which I believe are killed in action. But first, Reese Silas shows up in a Marvel comic, first time I believe that happened, and second, he's lamenting that Master Comac hasn't come back yet.
Mhm.
That seems like
Mhm.
some foreshadowing to me
Yeah, for
on
sure.
on that
I
one.
did like this wall, this wall though, and I
Mm,
I I think you're spot on with what you were saying because Avar Chris, Porter Engel, they're both in blue, and then you've got Stellan who's in red. So that makes sense that, and Burry's in blue, so they are presumed missing or whatever,
right.
as you're kind of going through there.
Right. Then Elzar Mann's reporting to the Jedi Council. We knew from having read Eye of Darkness that he's working with Lena So. He's kind of the, oh, how would you say it, the liaison from the Jedi to the
Mhm.
High Republic there. And there's this argument about getting out there and looking for Avar Chris and Porter Engel, which will become a theme as we discuss these
Mhm.
issues. Kind of need to move a little bit faster on this one because we still have 3 more issues to discuss.
Yeah.
But Yoda returns with Aslan Rel. And Aslan was actually this very minor character when it came down to it in the Edge of Balance mangas that we've
Right.
been reading. And last time we saw him, he was being like driven insane by from his exposure to the Nameless,
Mhm.
and then like ran off into the wilderness, like, and was bleeding from the eyes. I mean, he just was like went crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and then to see him come back with that kind of almost bionic, eye cover and that type
Hmm.
of thing, but then he's talking in the She Karai, I still hear the song. For
Right.
years, it was all I heard, and it's very haunting in a way, but it was a little, I'm not gonna lie, it was a little unsettling that, Yoda was utilizing him as a resource because I can understand why, but then again, that was a big gamble on his
Hmm.
part, I feel like too.
Yeah, Aslan's little eye covers remind me of Ochibo Stoons
Oh, good call.
when it came down to
Good
it.
call. Yep.
But here's the thing. So Yoda works with Aslan over a space of months there, and Aslan's fallen to the dark side
Mhm.
over all this, which is just brutal. The Check Council nearly attacks him before Yoda intervenes. But he's taking him back to the past through meditation. And at one point, Aslan was looking for a compass that a character named Das Lufbrick had that would lead to the planet that the name was from. Okay, Das Lufbrick came from the middle grade novel from Phase Two of the High Republic, so that was another neat little callback. Although we didn't get to see this character, and this ultimately culminates with Yoda and Aslan leading a Republic mission to this planet called Travix Prime aboard a ship called the Galleons. But when they get there, Aslan whispers something to one of the crew members aboard the ship as Yoda and Aslan, I should say, are boarding a shuttle. And that crew member just like goes into some sort of horrified trance and ends up causing that ship to crash
Yeah.
into the planet side, presumably destroying this compass that they were looking for. And Aslan saying, this is a victory that he's destroying this compass and the ability for others to get to this planet where the name was from so that the Jedi can't be just hunted by more of these creatures.
Mhm.
I don't know
Yeah,
you,
and
but it
it
seems like
was
a little late for that.
right, exactly. And the whole thing with Yoda, I mean, he was really defending Aslan and saying, his mind was fractured and almost making excuses for him in a lot of ways until this disaster ends up happening. And then Yoda's just, like such loss, almost like the same thing that we see when Order 66 happens.
Right. And this also is a low key way of giving some context to why he didn't believe that Luke would be able to turn Darth Vader.
Mhm.
Now, we don't have Aslan's full story, and maybe he does get redeemed to the light at some point. But after having worked this closely with someone who fell to the dark side and saw what they were capable of, perhaps when the time that Luke comes around and has to take down Anakin, he's like, no, there's just no chance that you're going to do this. Aslan was someone who was working with the Jedi and was not trying to destroy them, and you got Vader, who ultimately was like destroying everything.
Mhm.
So, what chance did Luke
Exactly.
have? So,
Yeah, and Yoda was just so overly trusting, and there was that one point where Aslan says, "Without your patience and kindness, your willingness to mind the darkness, clouding my memories." It was almost
mhm.
like he was gaslighting Yoda. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways to allow this to happen.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to issue two. I don't think it's going to take as long to discuss the next three issues. One, because they're 6 pages shorter than the first one, but two, they aren't introducing nearly as many new concepts as that first issue was. Especially, nothing like the Guardian protocols or anything. But this one, I it's like, oh, Jay's got to love this. It features Avar and Elzar,
Yep.
and it picks up right after the fall Starlight Beacon, like they all do, and they're consoling each other, and they mourn the loss of Stellangios. And Avar takes this whole thing really hard. She looks at the loss of Starlight as her personal failure. Now, we kind of knew this from our discussion of Eye of the Darkness. And Elzar admits to having killed Chancey Yarrow. And so he's trying to take some blame that if he hadn't killed her, then they wouldn't have been in this mess at all. And neither one of them is really giving the other one an inch to try and console them about this. Avar refuses to go back to Coruscant, and Elzar thinks it's because of his admission of killing Chancey Yarrow and that it's some sort of a quote unquote us issue here. So, what do you think about this introduction to the story and their parting?
Well, I know that Avar obviously had refused to go back, but it was almost in the way that it was described in this comic with the panels and everything like that was that Avar was really being almost insubordinate in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
and almost selfish is the way that I took it. That she felt like she had to go do this, and but usually Jedi, especially of this age, were more taking it upon themselves to be for the greater good. And I don't know, it just seemed really, she was like, I failed in my duty, I did this, and she was yelling at Avar or at Elzar, and it was almost uncomfortable to read. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
they just couldn't come to an agreement about how this was going to get handled, and then she just kind of leaves.
Yeah, well, we're seeing her weakness here. It's
Right.
failure. I mean, it's
Mhm.
this fear of failure that she has, and Elzar talks about it quite a bit. And Avar will say things like, the way she perceives the Force is as a song, and right
Yeah.
now it's singing a song of failure, and
Yes.
that song's name is Avar Chris, is essentially
Uh-huh.
how she puts it here. And so she feels like she has to go out there and make it right. That if she had done the right thing to begin with, then as Marshall, then Starlight Beacon wouldn't have fallen. And so she's out there, and so she's got her stubbornness. Meanwhile, you've got Elzar back on Coruscant making arguments to get Jedi behind the storm wall, doing whatever it takes to look for the Jedi that are trapped behind there. But let's call a spade a spade. He's really more concerned about Avar than anything.
Mhm.
And he goes to great lengths to try and make that happen, to the point where he's being reckless. And then 4-5, that protocol droid that he had given to Stellan, who's now kind of his adjutant, has to step in to keep him from doing things foolish. Like he tries to go through the storm wall. And as he's about to engage the hyperdrive, 4-5 engages Stellan's lightsaber and shorts it out so that he can't
Yeah.
do it, and instead gives him this device which they call the Tithonic Resonator, which apparently enhances the ability of a Jedi to communicate through the Force over longer distances. And so the flip side of this is Avar is behind the storm wall, and she's been getting help from some citizens on a world, but on this one world. But the Nile have been there, and they basically warned, like, if we find you helping the Jedi, then it's going to be rough on you. Well, that's exactly what happens. She gets some
Right.
help, and then I'll show up and start making life terrible. And just as much she's given despair, she hears Elzar's voice,
Mhm.
and she ignites her lightsaber and says, "For light and life," and she's all in again on this.
And then that's really when the Nile are like, "Oh, yeah, there she is." And then
Uh-huh.
you see, Elzar's ears actually bleeding because of it, and you
Yeah,
could tell that it was just really, really taking a huge toll on him at that point in time.
yeah, yeah. But I thought that was just so cool because they both got their groove back over
Mhm.
this. She realized she's not alone, that she has reason for hope. At the same time, he's been the other theme of this issue was that he's not Stellan Gios, that Stellan would not
Yes.
have had this thing. But at the end, it's like, he's made some sort of, he's not 100% certain, but he feels like he reached Avar. He felt something when he made that conversation. And then he says to 4-5, I was like, I'm not going to give up after all, is what Stellan would do. And
Right.
so, it's kind of like they, despite all the failures that each one of them have, they have that one moment of hope, and that's all they needed to realize, they're not alone, that there is a future worth fighting for.
Exactly, because they were always part of the trio, and they were inseparable. And so I think that it was obviously very hard for them to be apart, and with the storm wall and the inclusion zone and everything just making it even worse. That was
Mhm.
just that one little piece that they needed for each other, as you said.
Yeah, I gotta say, I was pretty happy to have read Eye of Darkness before reading this,
Definitely.
because now we know how that all resolves itself, and so that was pretty cool.
Mhm, for
Okay,
sure.
well, let's move on to issue 3, and this one is primarily about Bel Zettifar and a little bit about Buryaga, but I feel like we've covered this story quite a bit
Mhm.
already, with between talking about Tale of Light and Life and Eye of Darkness. But it starts again right after the fall of Starlight Beacon. Bell is not answering the call to return to Coruscant. He wants to stay behind and get an answer on what happened to Buryaga one way or the other. There's a great panel with Elzar just kind of giving him the side eye, like, he's dead, right? I saw him get carried off by Rathtars.
Yeah.
But Bell's like, throws back in his face, like, well, if this was Avar, you'd
Yeah,
stay
you wouldn't
behind.
be giving up, exactly.
And Elzar's like, oh, you got a point. And then jump forward 6 weeks. there's Bell and Buryaga with a little caption in the corner of that panel. It's like, if you want to find out how he found him, read the story. Every Jedi follows his
Yes.
own path from Tales of Light and Life. So I don't know. I had a good chuckle about that.
I did
And
too. As soon as it popped up, I was like, "Oh, okay."
right. So they
No.
return to Coruscant where they both get knighted. But this is where the real story comes in for this issue because Bell is struggling with just being there on Coruscant without really anything to do.
Yeah,
And Buryaga gets concerned for him and talks to Grandmaster Pre Tre Vader. Pre Tre Vader. It's hard to say. I
it
wish they
is.
wouldn't do that sometimes in Star Wars. And they basically decide that they're going to recruit Bell into this rapid response team that Lena So wanted back in the first issue. And then Buryaga ends up coming along. What did you think about Bell's struggle there?
Well, I first of all, I just wanna back up real quick to getting to see Indira Stokes, in
Oh,
that
yeah.
really cool kind of mechno chair sort of thing, which was both kinda creepy and cool at the same time, and then we get to see Ember. So, it was nice to be able to see that she made it out, and then Belle and Burry were both able to, kinda touch base with her, and, that Ember was actually staying with her when Belle thought that Ember went with Porter.
Because
So
we're left Ember behind.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and for Bell, as far as as you said, just finding something to do, he said, "I can work on whatever, I want to, so that's good," but then he just didn't know what to do necessarily. And then, finally, he was able to kind of move forward with something, and then towards the end, just getting to see him with his, new look and taking off all of his dreads and everything like that. He was
Okay. That was
yeah,
the question I was going to ask you.
yeah.
Bell Zettifar, with or without facial hair?
Oh, I like him in his original. Like, I liked the scruffy look with the facial hair and the dreads. I like that so much better,
Yeah, because he didn't
honestly.
have those in phase one. He had kind of the
No.
dread thing, but he didn't have the facial hair going
Mhm.
there. And
Exactly.
uh, I, I mean, it was a brilliant idea because it definitely showed like the passage of age, the passage of
Mhm.
time, and the added age that he had there. And because and I hadn't even thought about him like not shaving while he was on the boat.
On the
Uh,
ship, yeah, the
yeah,
little yep,
an
trying to
Iram.
find Dewey.
So yeah, so that was interesting. Right, but then this kinda takes, the rest of the story takes us up to where we were at, Trials of Light and Life, every Jedi walks his own path, which is he's there, on the Third Horizon, that ship, with Buryaga and Pratre Vater, and they respond to a distress signal on the planet Asternin. The Nile attack, and this is where Pratre Vater gets captured by Captain
Yes.
Shrike of the Cacophony.
Mhm.
And then, of
Yeah, and so that
course,
sets everything else up from there. Yep.
right. Of course, the next time we see him, he's being murdered by Marchion Rowe
Yeah,
in the Eye of Darkness there. Two
exactly.
things, though, that I did not expect that really surprised me of this story was one, the lightsaber nullifier that the Nile had.
Yeah, that's new. I've never remembered seeing that before.
Yeah, so that was pretty neat. But then
Mhm.
I like that they put a limit on that, that it draws so much power that they can't use it for long. But the Jedi don't know that because they've never encountered it before. And two, Pratre Vader was using Shan Zhu, which is an ancient form of unarmed force combat. I was thinking he was going to say like Terraskasi or something like that, but this was new as well, and it was pretty cool for the brief moment he got to use it before he got hit by that repulsor beam.
Yeah, and I wanted to do a little bit more research into that as well, and I think this is what, Ezra was said to be using in the Ahsoka series, right? Like, at the very end before he went back to using his lightsabers.
Did they ever name it though in the
I
Ahsoka
don't
series?
know. Yeah, that's
See,
the
that
thing, like,
was
I don't know if that was it or not. That's why I wanted to do some research.
'cause I just assumed that Ezra was just using the Force. I didn't know there was
Yeah,
necessarily any particular
like a name for it.
Force combat style here, but Pratre like confidently throws off his robe and starts, getting into those poses. I just was like, oh yeah, I'm here for this. I got to
Yeah,
see
that
this
was
on
so
screen.
yeah, for sure.
So, so yeah, he gets captured, and that leaves Buryaga and Belzetifar as the Jedi in command, for so to speak, on the emissary,
Mhm.
and where we see them later. Okay,
Yeah, big
moving Oh,
say
go ahead.
famous last words by Patri Veeder, where Belle says, "But
Uh-huh.
what if they have one of those creatures?" And then he says, "There you don't put much stock or you begin to understand how little value there is in what
What
if."
if? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Well,
like, okay, yeah. Sorry, dude.
indeed, indeed. Okay, so our fourth and final issue, which is starts again at the Fall Starlight Beacon, but this one stands out because it's about Marcion Rowe. The
Oh,
first
yeah.
three had been about our Jedi. Now we're getting to the villain. And in a nutshell, I'm just going to describe it up front. It says, go ahead, going through the plot elements here. They're victorious. Marcion makes a speech. The Nile party for days. Days turns into weeks. Girastaros starts getting reckless and advising Marchand, we got to do something. We got to organize. We got to start turning this into a state. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart and will be another entry on the list of vanquished enemies of the Republic. And then Marcion finds out about a Republic prison world or Republic prison that was on Ryloth that's been recovered. And that's when he gets Bulin, the Ithorian, who becomes his Minister of Advancement. And then General Weiss, as you were referring to earlier in this episode, betrays people on another world that are inside the occlusion zone and becomes the minister of protection. And that's how Marchand recruits her. And then finally, Gareth becomes the Minister of Information and kind of the person that's helping to organize and run the quote unquote Nile state. Right before she gets ready to head off to make her pitch to the Republic about getting a seat at the Senate. And of course, she's telling Marcion how proud she is of him and that, we've made the state, look at what you accomplished. We're moving on. We're leaving behind just the conquest and destruction. And you see Marcion after she leaves, he catches that bug out of midair and is like, yeah, what do I want?
Mhm.
Destruction and stuff like that. So you can clearly see that they don't actually see eye to eye on this.
Right.
Every time we see Marcion Rowe, he just gets more evil and more, I don't know how to, but I can see how he's turned into the Darth Vader of this era when I didn't see that at the beginning of the High Republic, but every time he just gets farther and farther down that scale. What'd you think of this story?
Yeah, there's a few things that I feel that this particular issue did so well. And as you said, just that Marcion Rowe just dripping with this delicious evilness, kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
But, I really appreciated the way that they set this up with Girastaros, and there was those separate panels where, as you said, they were celebrating and they were partying, and you see Marcion Rowe just kind of sitting there lounging in his throne. And at first Gira's like, "Oh yeah, we're all in up," and then it's like 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and she's getting antsier and antsier the whole time. And as you said, she's like, we got to do this. We got to do something about this. And yet, Marcian's just kind of like, yeah, it's whatever. And just letting things sort of unfold around him. And then the other thing I think it did really well too is just illustrating these separate uh, characters like Gira and just getting to see them and to see how they interact with each other. And also the relationship between Gira and Marcian too, because we were told in the book that they were very intimate. And you can definitely see that in the way that
Mm-hmm.
Kira was kind of trying to manipulate Marcian's, interests and that type of thing. And just all the intricacies of how all of these little political power plays were trying to, vie for these different types of things to happen. So I really, really appreciated this for that particular reason.
Yeah, no, that was really well done. She's trying hard to appeal to him and his senses about, what it is that she does so well, which is state building and statecraft. And he's not into it. And he finally just kind of backs down, doesn't respond to it. But we see where that comes to a head in Eye of Darkness.
Hmm.
I am really glad I read the Martyr Row story from Tales of Light and Life before having read this because I think it sheds so much light on the ending of this. And I'm thinking of those lines about, Marta is speaking to an unnamed descendant about what she's learned about, gifts freely given to like basically taking what you want.
Yes.
And I think that's where Marcion Rowe is. It is all about the taking. It is all about this getting revenge on the galaxy, so to speak. And he is absolutely not interested in the governing part. He is all about the conquest part. And so
Yep.
it's that message of Martero turned up to 11.
Oh, for sure. And just the whole idea, like you said, with the crushing of the bug is so prophetic, in so many
Mhm.
different ways. Yep.
Yeah. And so he's got these ministers, and he just kind of mumbles under his breath in one panel, like, they're Tempests. They're just another version. They're Tempest runners. They're another versions of Tempests here.
Mhm.
And they're just tools to an end. They can run their organization as long as it gets him where he wants to go, which is the further taking. And so I'm really curious with Martian where this all goes, what ultimately ends up to his downfall. Does he get to this point where it's like, you know, is he just got to take? Well, what if he conquered the galaxy? What would he do next?
Mhm.
So I don't know, fascinating character. I think Martian, when I was first introduced to him, he seemed like a villain and a perfectly good villain, but it was just kind of like, what is there to him? Well, they've done such a great job of parceling that information out to us. And
Oh, yeah.
I really am appreciative of how them going back to phase two, because it just kind of seemed like, what was the point of that at first? I enjoyed those stories, but at the end is like, how does this shed light on phase three? Well, and we came to some of those answers, but more specifically, how is it that this informs us about Martian Rowe, and that one story in Tales of Light and Life that bridges phase two to phase three just, I think, put all the pieces into place. So they're firing on all cylinders with the High Republic right now. I'm just really impressed at how cohesive a story they are telling, especially right now in phase three, with everything that's going on between the books, the comics, the short stories, all of it. It's just been fantastic.
Oh, I agree, and I am totally invested, and even though we're getting a lot of these stories kind of retold to us from different points of view and in different ways,
Mhm.
I just I can't get enough, and I don't tire of it. It's not like I was reading these comics and saying, "Oh gosh, we already got this story." I was like, "No, give me more, give me more." And again, just seeing some of these characters like General Vice, for example, and the whole Mary Allen thing, and the way that she was dressed though was kind of really not really freaking me out, but the cape and everything was almost like a jester, but I know that the diamonds were supposed to be indicative of the Mary Allen tattoos and that type of
Mhm.
thing, but she was a little unsettling to me. But I have to ask, what do you think? Obviously, General Vice, we know that she teams up with Martian and becomes, kind of one of the coordinators of a lot of different things, but what really is her MO? Like she's this general that is legendary for all of these combat skills, and yet she's basically like a mewling little quim, kind of a thing under Martian, like I will serve you and I will do this and I will do that. So do you think it's just about just serving somebody under power, or what is her ultimate MO here?
Well, she was the leader of a mercenary band. She was a
Yeah,
mercenary general and stuff like that.
right.
And she's essentially I'm assuming, wanted in various parts of the galaxy. And when she gets here, she's in later stages of her life, because this is what, 150 years after phase two, 100,
Mhm.
150 years. So she's older at this point, and older from, we have a new idea of how long Mary Lyons lived. But anyway,
Right.
she's, and so, I think she's an opportunist. She's taking advantage of an opportunity here, which is she can live under the boot of the Nile, or if she says to Martian, this is an audition, she can work with them. And this is the only way she's going to have like any type of power or make a name for herself. And so that's it. She just basically is taking advantage of an opportunity, working for the highest bidder. And right now, the only game in town behind the storm wall is the Nile. So
That makes sense.
she went for it.
Mhm. Yep, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
All right. So the impossible question time. Which of these four issues was your favorite?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that is an impossible question. I really loved this last one just because I can't get enough of Martian Rowe, honestly. I just really
Mhm.
can't, and I'm just completely intrigued by that. But gosh, I'm gonna have to say, hmm, probably the one with the very first one,
Yeah.
with just the explanation of the reason why they were going under this protocol, the Guardian protocols, and how things evolved in the Jedi Order because of this. And these were kind of the beginning sort of seeds for that, and seeing all of those different characters. I mean, we got a ton of different characters in that one. So yeah, I'm going to go with number one.
Yeah, I'll be clear up front. All 4 of these are an A
Oh,
story
yeah.
for
Oh, yeah.
me. I feel like the Bell and Buryaga maybe presented. That's not true. So the Avar Elzar issue and then the Buryaga Bell issue, I think, presented the least new information that you couldn't have gleaned from Tales of Light and Life. Okay.
Mhm.
But I think the brilliance of setting this up the way it did, having the first issue and then bookended by the 4th issue. So you had the first issue telling the development and the steps that the Jedi and the Republic were taking, and then the 4th issue talking about what Marchion and the Nile were doing.
Mhm.
And so opposite sides of the coin in this galactic conflict was a really, really great idea to start one
Right.
way and then end at the other side. But and for that reason, I'm having a really hard time deciding which one of these 2 I like better. It was so cool seeing these Guardian protocols and then be able to just kind of deduce from those what that meant for the Jedi of the sequel or the prequel and original trilogy era. You know, where the things that happened here influenced where they ended up, another 100 years later. So I
Right.
think maybe the first one was my favorite, but this one with Marchion was a close second.
Oh, yeah. They were, like you said, they're all an A, so it's really, really difficult to pick, but, as a series, highly recommend for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. And now I really want to read some more of Kevin Scott's High Republic comics
Oh,
from this
yeah.
phase. So
Oh, yeah, definitely.
okay, well, get us another book already. Come on. All right.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I want to say thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of the High Republic Shadows of Starlight. We hope you enjoyed it. And if so, then make sure you hit the subscribe and like buttons, follow buttons, whatever you want to call them, on your podcatcher choice, and you'll get all of the future episodes of Podcast Stardust downloaded for you automatically. I also like to remind you can find our entire catalog of shows over on richardsapp.com, which is home to all the other great shows that are on the network covering all the great geek topics that are out there. And as always, we greatly appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews on whatever podcatchers that you use. And we also love it when you share the show on social media with your friends. So with that having been said, Jay, you want to remind everybody what our online presence is and where our social media contacts can be found?
Absolutely. So, as always, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, also known as X these days, at Podcast Stardust. And we also have a ton of other places that you can find us, such as Pinterest and YouTube. And we're now also on YouTube Music. So, hit us up over there, like and subscribe. And we are also on Discord. So, if you're up for some real time chatter and you want to join us on our room over on the RetroZap Discord server, then you can just go to our show page, click on the community tab, and boom, you are there. And our newest collaboration is with Saber Masters, and we have a referral code at sabermasters.com/discount/stardust. And that link is in our show notes. So if you head over to our show and you click on that link, you can get hooked up with some really amazing lightsabers at a really great deal. So with that, Dennis, why don't you let everybody know what else you've got going on right now and anything upcoming, past, present, future, all that good stuff.
Right. So my wife Beth and I have marked our calendars for April, which will see the debut of season 5 of Discovery, and we'll be covering that on our Star Trek podcast called Warp Trails. And so if you want to find some past episodes of Warp Trails discovering Picard, Lower Decks, Strange New Worlds, and previous seasons of Discovery, just head over to richardsapp.com and you can find the entire back catalog. Otherwise, just head to your podcast of choice, look for the Richard Zapp podcast feed, and you'll find upcoming episodes of Warp Trails there. Jay, what is the latest in the world of cosplay?
Well, as always, you can catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I'm still over there all the time as Ahsoka and Hera and the Fourth Sister Inquisitor, and still working on that original concept Mandalorian, hoping to debut that in April, and got a lot coming up this spring. So again, just keep going over to j.snipscosplay for all of the latest cosplay updates.
Okay. So, upcoming on the show this Wednesday, we're celebrating Valentine's Day with a discussion of the Legends novel, The Courtship of Princess Leia by Dave Wolverton. And on Friday, it'll be our next batch of Star Wars news. So, thanks for listening to episode 689 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.